So thank you, Heather, Dilly, JP, and Alex for their insights. Now we have the benefit of getting this all, what we've been discussing and hearing this morning, into a greater perspective. And I'm really thankful for having now our first keynote with the title Blockchain Revolution, the State of the Union. I'm really pleased to introduce to you Don Tapscott. He is the co-founder and executive chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute. He has authored 16 books, and in 18, Don published with his son a new paperback edition of Blockchain Revolution containing new material covering recent developments in the blockchain industry. He's an adjunct professor at INSEAD, and he's a chancellor emeritus of the Trent University. Don, the floor is yours. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bonjour. Ça va? Il faut pratiquer mon français, même pas ici. I'm delighted to be here at this very important event, and I thought what might be helpful is to stand back from all of this and talk about the big picture and what's actually occurring here. And if you ask the people who should know, like say the Gartner Group, they say not much. Blockchain's kind of stalled. It's going to end up being nothing more than an add-on for ERP and CRM software. And after the crash of crypto, a lot of people were sort of very cynical about this whole blockchain movement. So what's the truth? Well, factually, this view is incorrect. And you can all be forgiven for having a little cognitive dissonance when you read in the same newspaper that some rather large organizations in the world are embracing blockchain for transformation, like China. China is a big organization. They have a lot of people, big economy. That's a joke. Or like, say, Facebook launching Libra. Central banks around the world are talking about creating Fiat cryptocurrencies. And at the Blockchain Research Institute, we're doing 110 projects looking at what's actually going on. So how can this be that pundits are saying nothing's going on, but there's some really extraordinary things that are happening? Well, what I'd like to do is to kind of share with you some of our research, and to be frank and honest, because I think there are some real problems and challenges going forward. Now, some of you may know I wrote a couple of books in the 1980s that nobody read. I think my mother may have bought most of the copies, but I finally wrote a bestseller in the early 1990s, and that was Paradigm Shift, which was obviously a big book. And then the first bestseller about the web and business was The Digital Economy in '94. And I was asked 20 years later to write the anniversary edition of the book. And I had to reflect on what had occurred. And I found myself coming to the conclusion that we've been through a first era of the digital age. Mainframes, mini computers, PCs, the internet, the web, the mobile web, social media, the cloud, big data. And now we're entering into a second era, where technology infuses itself into everything, into the physical world. Billions and trillions of inert objects have become smart communicating devices that have identities and do transactions. Technology that does things that it wasn't programmed to do, and you know all the rest. And I came to the conclusion that the foundational technology for all of this was in fact the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies or blockchain. And that the best way to think about this is not some interesting new technology, but it's really the second era of the digital age. So I'm just going to set up this analysis of what's going on with this view. The first era, 40 years or so, we had the Internet of Information. But if I send you some information, say a PDF of this deck, I'm actually not sending you the information, I'm sending you a copy, right? And even with a website, I retain the original. And that works fine for information. But when it comes to things that really matter in our economies, in our societies, assets, things of value that belong to somebody, assets like money or stocks or bonds or swaps, securities, the data in our identities, our healthcare records, our a vote, a cultural asset like art or music, intellectual property. When it comes to assets, copying those is a terrible idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you 1,000 francs, it's really important that I don't still have the money, right? Now, cryptographers have called this the double spend problem. And that's what Satoshi cracked in 2008. He cracked the double spend problem. Now, the way that we've managed this problem in our economy so far has been through intermediaries, banks, transfer agents, stock exchanges, credit card companies, governments, social media companies that perform all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify the party, they do identity, they clear and settle transactions, they keep records, and overall they've done a pretty good job, but there are growing problems. A big one being that they're all based on centralized systems, which means that they can be hacked. And there are two kinds of companies today, those who have been hacked and those who will be hacked. There are other problems too that I don't have time to go into now, but what if there were not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast global distributed ledger where anything of value, from money to stocks to our identities to music, could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way. That's what blockchain is. Now, I had this great analogy on why blockchains were so hard to hack. And I ended up using the analogy on a show, a TV show. John Oliver has a comedy show late at night, and he did a whole show on blockchain. And it was a whole half hour. Now, this analogy I thought was pretty great, but I don't use it anymore, and you'll see why.
And because of the complicated process the network uses to verify records, it is very secure. Now, relax. I'm not going to get into what that process is or how it works, but I will share a really helpful, really dumb metaphor for why it is safe.
The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is a highly processed thing, sort of like a chicken McNugget. And if you wanted to hack it, it'd be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that, but for now, it's going to be tough.
Hold on. That is an absolutely horrible thought. So why is that reporter so happy about the idea? Because if anyone ever figures out how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, that chicken is going to be up. He's going to spend the rest of his life suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry about the experience. The things I saw, buck, buckaw. My body is whole, but what of my soul?
So, my body is whole, but what of my soul? So you can see why I don't use the analogy anymore. I still think it's a good analogy, though. So let's talk about what's happening and what isn't happening. And these are 10 of a couple of dozen big areas of use case. And I don't have time to go through a lot of them, but I'm going to spend 1 minute on each of these. First of all, supply chains. This is a $50 trillion industry. If you own it, it came from a supply chain. If you got it, a supply chain enabled it. And there are, oh, look at this. We didn't get the right fonts in the deck. Anyway, supply chains are being transformed. Now, this started with the IBM Food Trust and using and Walmart as a customer because you need to know about the provenance of food. And if you know that as a consumer, you can trust the food and have confidence in it. But also as the provider and the retailer, you can make sure that, say, vegetables or pharmaceuticals or whatever move through a supply chain in the right way, at the right temperature and proper timing, proper storage, and so on. And if you look at something like seafood, if you go out here and have a fish in a restaurant in Geneva, 25% of the time it's labeled incorrectly. It's cheap fish labeled as expensive fish, or endangered species and labeled as okay fish. Well, now that problem is being solved through supply chains. And you think about it, you got planes and boats and trains and trucks and various, all the trade finance that goes with that, escrow agents and tax authorities and borders and everything. And all this stuff is moving around with paper and emails and physical faxes and physical documents and so on. Imagine if all of that were a shared network state, where real time you can see what's going on, where there's a single version of the truth, where you can do microtransactions. This is an area that's absolutely happening. And if you're going to hear from, I think, from Bob Wolpert, right, this afternoon, who's, is he here right now? No. From California Foods. They supply McDonald's and all kinds of other big players. And they're moving their supply chain to a blockchain-based platform. Health. I agree with the last panel. This could be the killer app for healthcare, or for blockchain. Not just because health is so important and it's such a big deal. In the US, it's 19% of the GDP. Now, if they had a single payer system, they could get it down to 12 just by doing that, but we won't go there. But there are various parts of the healthcare system. And a really big, if you want to start in a good place, start with a patient. And a patient has an identity right now. These identities will become sovereign, they'll become owned by patients, and they'll move around with them. So at the University Health Network in Toronto, the 7th highest rated hospital in the world, there are 2 in the US, the Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins, and there's one in Toronto, amazingly. The patient record is called MyUHM. Before you leave the hospital, your patient, after an x-ray, your radiology report is in your identity, and you can just go and look at it. Now, the next step is to move that to a blockchain where you can not only look at it, you own it. You can do whatever you like with it. Send it somewhere else, get a second opinion. You can anonymize it and give it to science or sell it. The amazing data from the last panel that this is really valuable information in the developing world. It could be more than what your actual salary is. So medical record is just one initiative, and we've launched a big program now with a number of the largest hospitals in North America, and the Canadian government is supporting this to move healthcare in North America to a blockchain-based record. And we'd love to share that with you. The Internet of Things, the physical world. My hotel room here is, it has an IP address. The door has an IP address. I had a camera stolen from a hotel room in Miami a decade ago, and the door knew about me. It knew who'd been in and out of the room. We actually found an unauthorized access. So I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address, and all these things talk to each other. Now, I have no idea what his toaster says to his refrigerator, but apparently they have meaningful conversations. They're like friends or something. Friends with benefits. I don't know. Ooh. Anyway, that was 10 years ago. Now, well, actually, he was bragging that his fence talks to his sprinkler system. And I was like, well, Ken, why would you care? He says, well, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense. That was 10 years ago. Today, these devices are not only communicating, they're going to do transactions. And that light bulb there is going to buy power from a distributed power source. The light bulb will need an identity, as will the power source. And when the light bulb pays for the power, by the way, radically lowering the cost of power and enabling a distributed energy grid that can be green, when it pays for the power promptly, its identity and its reputation will be enhanced as a trustworthy device. So think about trillions of these things in our world, not just communicating, but actually doing transactions to create a more sustainable and a more prosperous world. Now, of course, there could be a dark side to all of this too, and that's a topic for later. And of course, you all know WiseKey. You should be very proud. Those of you who live in Geneva, the company is based here, a leader in identity of people, but also of things as well. And this is going to be a key technology going forward. Financial services. I asked my son Alex when we were writing the book, because he's a banker. I said, I don't understand this industry. It's just so complicated. Can you tell me what it does, like really simply? And he said, let me think about it. He came back a day later, and he says, I think it does 9 things. It authenticates identity and assets. That's a stock. That's a franc. You're a person. It stores value. It used to be in safes, and now it's in computer systems. It moves value. Because it moves value, it has this value that it gets to lend. It funds and invests in value, so the venture capital, investment banking, angel investment even. You've got private equity and all kinds of investing elements. It exchanges value, so various kinds of transactions, stock exchanges, and so on. It insures value, insurance companies, the reinsurers, etc. It analyzes value, the whole analyst industry, and it accounts for value, the accounting companies, the auditing companies, and so on. Now, if I was giving a 1-hour talk on this slide, I could take 10 minutes and tell you on how, that's more than an hour, anyway, on each of these, how blockchain is happening or not happening. But in every one of them, something really big is going on. And from the previous panel, someone, I forget who it was, said everything is going to be tokenized, meaning assets that are all physical today are going to become digital. And we don't understand this yet, and our regulators sure don't get it. They think about all of this as cryptocurrencies. Well, of course, there are community-oriented cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. The amazing thing about Bitcoin is that it works. But there are also tokens that work on platforms. Like Ether, to me, is not a currency. It's a token that enables us to construct and use smart contracts. You have utility tokens like Golem that's trying to get all of you to use their cloud and to put your computer up on the cloud. They need some kind of token to incent you to do that. There are security tokens. All securities will become tokenized. There was a token offering last year of over $1 billion US. There was no investment bank, no stock market, and no stock. The investors were investing in tokens that represented an interest in this company. There are all kinds of others as well. Fiat, crypto fiat currencies, and I'll get to that in a second. Now, this is one that I always thought was a really huge one for blockchain, and it's moving very, very slowly, to be frank. So look at things like land titles. 70% of the land titles in the developing world are not enforceable. And you're in Honduras, and some dictator comes to power and he says, I know you got a piece of paper that says you own your land, but the central government computer says that my friend owns your land. This happened on a mass scale. India, someone bribes a local clerk in the land titles office, and all of a sudden you don't own your farm, you're paying rent. And I thought this was a huge opportunity. Of course it is. But the really big problem is getting a valid land title in the first place. Then you can get it onto a blockchain. And once it's there, of course, nobody can mess with it. Unless they know how to turn a chicken McNugget back into, no. Now, another one was the music industry. The Internet of Information broke our intellectual property regime around music, right? So we didn't have an internet of value, so we took songs that were assets And we treated them like information. We just published them, sent them out to friends. We all did this. MP3 files. And the upshot of that is if you're a songwriter 35 years ago, you write a platinum song, it gets 1 million singles, you'd make $46,000 in revenue. Today, you make $35, which will barely buy you a raclette over here in the hotel that I was staying at. So Imogen Heap has this thing called Mycelia, British singer, songwriter, Grammy winner. You put your song on this platform. It's inside a smart contract that protects your intellectual property rights. Someone wants to listen to the song says, sure, go ahead, or it's a few microcents. You want to put the song in your movie, and the song says, well, what do you want to do? Is it a theme song? Somebody's going to sing it? It's background? And the way she describes it is my song acts as a business. Well, it turns out this one takes a long time to happen. Now, one of the reasons is we have this whole legacy of recorded music that is not, in the near term, going to end up on a blockchain. It's going to be good music or new music that will. Now, the good news about that is that 90% of all the music in the world will be created in the next 10 years. So we have an opportunity to do this, but that one's moving slowly. There are a dozen opportunities in telecom that we're exploring, and these are revolutionary. There's one, the argument is that blockchain as a transactional platform on mesh networks can deliver 5G practically for free. And so the big telcos are struggling with this, trying to figure out how they can maintain their old proprietary type networks in the face of this. Blockchain's a big opportunity for these telcos that own a media company, and increasingly they do. Energy and climate. This is turning out to be a really big one. I just got an email actually about 4 days ago from the chief information officer of one of the largest oil companies in the world, and his CEO had asked him to contact us to explore working with the Blockchain Research Institute. But he said, we've been experimenting with blockchain in the upstream part of the industry for several years now. And he says, we have come through multiple pilots. We have now concluded this technology is ready for prime time. That was the word he used. And we're going to rebuild our entire upstream, which is all the important stuff in an oil and gas company, around this technology. And that's an extraordinary thing. We've got all the moves towards a distributed power grid, which is exciting. And I'll tell you one, I think I mentioned this last year, but it's now finally taking off. It's a company, full disclosure, I'm involved in it, called CarbonX.ca, and we're tokenizing carbon credits. And you're going to buy that carbon neutral espresso machine because it comes with these tokens that are they're not like a loyalty point. They're supercharged. They can do all this stuff. They're exchangeable, and you can transact with them, and you can even turn them into a fiat currency if you want. The opportunity is to change the behavior of billions of people, their consuming behavior, through economic incentives. And in a couple of weeks, I'll just pre-announce it now, we're going to be announcing a first carbon neutral ETF, where you can have full beta, you can have a fund that invests in all the best companies, but it's a carbon neutral fund. And blockchain enables us to do that. Manufacturing is really an exciting area where there's a lot of good stuff going on as well. Moog is a case that we did 3 years ago, and it's evolved quite a bit. Moog used to, it provides precision parts for airlines. So it used to create these parts, ship them out to the airline, and somehow they'd get integrated into an airplane. Well, now they 3D print these parts in the actual factory of the airplane. And the whole transactional platform, tracking them, taking care of all of that, is done on blockchain. One of the biggest opportunities, and you'll hear it, you've already heard it today, but it keeps coming up, is this notion of identity. And let me be a little hyperbolic here to make a point. Data, it's the new asset class of the digital age. But when you think about it, we sort of have this digital feudal structure today. Do you remember feudalism? You all studied your European history. Under the feudal system, you didn't get paid a wage. You were tied to the land, and the landlord would expropriate your produce, your vegetables, or whatever it was that you grew, and you got to keep some of it. Well, today, all of you create this new asset class called data. And the virtual you knows more about you than you do because you can't remember what you bought a year ago or said a year ago or your location or what health exam you had or what medication you took or what you got on that university course or so on and so on. You create the data, but it gets taken away from you and you're left with a few digital cabbages. And it means that you can't, people think it's about privacy. It is. Privacy is the foundation of freedom. People say to me, oh, Don, privacy's dead, get over it. This is stupidity. Privacy is the foundation of freedom. But it's more than that, because if you don't own this data, you can't monetize it. And this is creating these companies where there's a huge bifurcation of wealth. It means that the data is not secure, and you can't use the data to plan your life. So all of this data represents our identities. We need to get them back so that we can manage our own identities responsibly in our own interests. Is this such a radical idea? That we create the data? Maybe we ought to not just have access to it or have it protected by GDPR or government. We should own it so that we can use it to build better lives and more prosperous lives. Blockchain enables this, and we're up to here in projects around creating a self-sovereign identity where this data, your identity is with you and it moves around with you and it's capturing all your medical information, your heart rate, and it's sweeping up all this transactional exhaust that you leave throughout your life and you manage it. Now this is going to take a while, but this is a huge opportunity. The final one where a lot is going on, interestingly, is government. And we kind of predicted this when we wrote the book originally. Remember Al Gore, 1993? Reinvention of government. Better, cheaper government enabled by the internet. Is there anyone here who thinks the internet has fundamentally improved government for the better? We paved the cow path. We automated existing ways of doing things. But we've got but now with blockchain, see, governments don't just deal with information, public information, they deal with assets. That's really what governments do, the shared value that we all have in society. And we now have a platform whereby we can change the deep structure and architecture of government and how we orchestrate capabilities to create public value, so on. Now, another one that's high on everybody's mind these days is what's happening to democracy. And of course, democracy doesn't exist in all countries. And there's a growing view that maybe it's not such a good system. A lot of young people agree with the bumper sticker, don't vote, it only encourages them. And that's kind of funny, except it isn't really, because I think democracy is a pretty good system. So, and there's a real crisis of legitimacy that's emerging. And the cause of this is complicated, but if you look at something like the US, citizens have no actual power in the sense that politicians are not accountable to the citizens. 94% of Americans think there should be a background check for firearms purchases. The will of the people, right? But Congress can't pass a law reflecting the will of the people. Why? Well, because they're not accountable to the people who elected them. They're accountable to the big funders that put them in power. So that's one. This is a complicated topic. But we have a legitimacy crisis in the sense that legitimacy is the idea that you may disagree with who's in power, but at least you think the system is the best system. And there's a growing concern about that. Now we have a president of the United States that says democracy isn't legitimate. It's corrupt. Washington is a cesspool. All kinds of people are double voting and manipulating at the ballot box. And there's even talk that he says that if he didn't get a majority in the next election, then he might not leave power because of all this corruption. It's best for him to stay in power. So, what was that? Houston, we have a problem here. Now, blockchain is not the solution to this. In fact, blockchain is not the solution to anything. Technology doesn't solve our problems. Humans do. But once again, the technology genie has escaped from the bottle, and it was summoned by this anonymous person or persons at this uncertain time in history. And we have another opportunity. We have another kick at the can to make some really big changes. E-voting, you're going to hear about this today. There's some cool companies that I met last night. You're never going to really be comfortable voting online unless you know the double spend problem has been solved. That you have cryptographic proof that your vote was cast for the person for whom you voted, and it can't be moved around or deleted or anything can be done. Only blockchain can enable that. But we have all kinds of new exciting things too. We're working on this concept of a smart vote. Why isn't a vote inside a smart contract where you're not only voting for a person, you're voting for their policy? Soon we'll have smart money. You send your kid off to university, you give him some money, you hope he buys books and tuition, spends the money on the right thing. Well, with smart money, send him off to university, he goes into the bar and orders a mojito, and the money says, sorry, Bob, I don't do mojitos. I only do tuition and books. So why couldn't we have that? These are one of many, many ways we can build a better body politic. And the final one, and good for the organizers of this event, is the notion of a fiat cryptocurrency. The People's Bank of China is a leader on this. Their DCEP, Digital Currency Electronic Payments. And this is a very, very powerful thing that can be used for bad, but it can be used for good, giving central bankers much more transparency. You could have a lighter touch on regulation. You want to put money into the money supply, you can see exactly what happens. Rather than giving it to banks, you could helicopter drop it onto the mobile devices. All kinds of huge opportunities there. So, that's a little slice. It's uneven and combined, but overall people who say that this isn't happening are deeply uninformed. And that's not surprising. Let me just set up the next session of this event by pre-announcing a couple of things. The Blockchain Research Institute is the largest independent think tank on blockchain in the world. And as I mentioned, we're doing over 100 projects on use cases, policy, challenges of implementation, governance, and so on. And for every one of these projects, there are multiple deliverables, reports, videos, infographics, data sets, and so on. This is funded by 70 of the largest companies in the world and also a growing number of governments. And I'm very pleased to announce that Geneva is now a member of the Blockchain Research Institute. And thank you. That means that the Geneva government and any employee will get full access to all this IP and services, but also they will be making available a lot of the IP that we have to the public in this canton, in Switzerland, globally for that matter, on a Creative Commons basis. So you will shortly have access to millions of dollars worth of IP and know-how. And then as part of this, and I'm running out of time here, so I'll leave it. There's a session with Carlos Maria and Wang Wei later, talking about how this is going to be at the heart of the Center of Excellence, Blockchain Center of Excellence in Geneva, and linking Toronto, Geneva, and Beijing as the trust triangle. And our goal is to roll out these centers of excellence all around the world as a way of bridging this gap between potential and reality. In some ways, a sister event to this one will happen in April 7th and 8th in Toronto. And the focus of that event is on blockchain for the enterprise. Last year, we had 150 speakers, 20 countries, 62% were VP level or above, and we would invite you all to attend this. And on the final night, we have our Enterprise Blockchain Awards. If you think you're a good company or you have a customer that's doing interesting things in blockchain, you have until January the 31st to submit an application for the Enterprise Blockchain Awards. And just go to blockchainrevolutionglobal.com and then you'll find it, the-EB-awards. We had a great award ceremony, black tie, Imogen Heap sang at it, and so on. I'm also pleased to tell you that we have today 4 full courses on blockchain for business in partnership with INSEAD and Coursera, the largest provider of courses in the world. This cost almost $1 million to create. They're beautiful courses. They're getting top ratings, and it's $79 a month. And if you go to this website right now, Coursera.org, promo Blockchain Revolution, you can get 25% off the massive $79 fee. And I'm also announcing today that in 2 weeks we will have 4 new courses called Blockchain and Financial Services for people in that industry. This is announcement day. On February the 4th, my co-author, a very talented lad named Alex Tapscott, has got a new book coming out, and it's a beautiful book. It's got a big analysis of Facebook's Libra and stable coins, and is looking at these big transformations that I alluded to today in the financial services industry. It's up on Amazon.com right now. You can pre-order it. And the way to get this book is in massive volume, okay? Large numbers. Christmas. You think it's a long way away. It's coming soon. And I know you have friends that you care about. Do you have employees? No, seriously. It's a great book. I just love this thing. Okay, let me close. This is a new paradigm, what you're here talking about at this event. And when you get a new paradigm, you typically get a leadership crisis. New paradigms cause dislocation and conflict. They're often received badly, with coolness. The leaders of Newtonian physics fought against Einstein's general theory of relativity. They just couldn't get it. And a new paradigm often results in this innovator's dilemma, in the sense that the leaders of the old paradigm have great difficulty embracing the new. So how is your company going to find leadership for change? How is Geneva and Switzerland, and for that matter, any region, going to find leadership for change? Well, let me begin by saying the stakes are really high here. If this is true, that we're talking about the second era of the internet, the first era was based in Silicon Valley. Where will the second era be based? Jury's out on that. I don't think it will be Silicon Valley. And there'll be multiple locations. In China, there are extraordinary things that are going on. Switzerland has Zug and Zurich. But we think that Geneva has a lot of potential, which is why we decided to create our first European office here in Geneva. And you have all self-selected as leaders coming to this event, showing interest. And that's great, because leadership typically doesn't come from the top. You know, you get a great leader like Fred Smith at FedEx, who's driving the transformation of his business and starting with the logistics industry around blockchain. That's rare. Normally, leadership comes from somewhere, and it can be anywhere. We documented a story of a clerical secretary who was the key person in the transformation of a division of one of the biggest banks in the world. And she had what it took to be a leader. She willed it. Leadership is each of our opportunity. Can you do this? Well, I don't know. I'm sort of the view that the future is not something to be predicted. It's something to be achieved. And there's a leader in you that wants to make this happen. And what you've got to do is will it, show some curiosity, start to work with others. And today, we're bringing you a ton of intellectual property and know-how. in the Blockchain Center of Excellence in Geneva that will help you with that. I was going to end right there, but I was asked by some people who were here last year to use this metaphor. And for those of you who were last year, I apologize. But at the Institute, we've been studying nature to try and get a better handle on what a distributed world could look like and what are the ways that it operates. And fish come in schools, bees come in swarms, starlings come in this thing called a murmuration. Do you know this word, murmuration? It's an English word. It's in the dictionary. That's what starlings come in. It represents the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And starlings are out over a 20-kilometer radius foraging for food. And at night they create this spectacular thing. And it has a function. It protects the birds from predators. See on the right of the screen here, that's a hawk, 25 times the size of a starling, being chased away by the collective power of the little birds. Scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. And there's leadership, but there's no one leader. And when the moment is right, this is one of the most spectacular things in nature. So is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or could we actually learn something from this? Well, the murmuration functions according to the principles of the trust protocol. Remember I said that trust is not achieved by a middleman, it's achieved by cryptography and collaboration and some clever code. There's code in the DNA of the birds that gives it some rules. A big one is don't bump into anybody else. But there are other rules, like don't get too far away. This is a huge collaboration. The murmuration also embraces the principle of interdependence. You know, if I'm talking to a CEO audience, I'll say, look, and I don't think business can succeed in a world that's failing. And we've got to step up as business leaders. Well, the murmuration functions as if the interest of an individual bird is connected to the interest of the murmuration as a whole. And another one I'll mention, principle, is integrity, which is the foundation of trust. This thing has integrity. Let me explain that. What is trust? What is trust? I wrote a book about this, and it took me 3 months to write a single sentence about trust. And I think I can say it in a sentence. Trust is the expectation that the other party or entity will act with integrity. Trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity, that they will do the right thing. They'll be honest, considerate of your interests, abide by their commitments. Which is why a little starling will chase after a killer 25 times its size, because it knows that the other birds will do the right thing, that they will have its back. So, you know, I look at this, I kind of get inspired, because I wonder, what could we do if we built a global trust protocol of glass and air and cryptography and clever code? What kind of intractable problems could we solve? Maybe, if we do this right and bring our values to the table by the millions and hundreds of millions, that this more distributed world that our children and grandchildren inherit might actually be a better one. So, thank you very much. Thank you.